plans has been the blueprint for its development, each one setting out not just for its economic goals, but a vision of what kind of a nation China aims and strives to be. The 15th plan, which spans from 2026 to 2030, arrives at a moment of global change, where technology, geopolitics, climate all reshape how countries think about growth. So today we'll be unpacking what this next plan tells us about China's ambitions, priorities, and how it might redefine the relationship between state, market, and innovation. So I'm very lucky to have two brilliant minds joining me today. They are, from my furthest, Dr. Justine Haig, political economist from the University of Cambridge, whose work examines the state's role in the development and industrial transformation. And to my right, we have Mr. Arnold Bartrand, who's the author and geopolitical analyst known for his deep insights into China's political economy and global narratives. So let's dive in. I'm going to start with Justine. So China's FYP have long been the framework through which the state guides economic transformation, right? So from your perspective, how should we understand the function of planning in China today, especially as the balance between market dynamism and state coordination evolves from your perspective? Justine.
Yeah, so China is a very particular case of striking a balance between state interventions and letting market forces unleash. So if we look at China's economy today, we see many market or capitalist elements, thriving private sector, commodification of labor, integration into the global capitalist system. But China distinguishes itself from many economies in the world, and especially Western economies, in that the state plays a very central role. So not only in recent years, but you could argue for decades, has economic planning and industrial policy stood very, very central. And in that sense, although China is very capitalist, it's at its roots organized around socialist principles. And this is something we've seen historically with five-year plans. And one key point here is that the state controls the financial sector and the direction of investment. And this has been really key in guiding China towards the technological frontier and towards high-tech manufacturing, etc., that the state guides capital rather than capital guiding the state.
Right.
And this is something where China is quite different from, for example, the United States.
Thank you, Justine, for painting us a broad picture of the differences in China's comparative political economy. I'm going to turn to Arnold. Arnold, previously, you actually talked to me about how the 15th plan marks an almost poetic milestone since Mao's vision of catching up with the United States. Maybe you can unpack that a little bit. So what's symbolically or substantively different about this particular moment in China's long-term trajectory? Maybe you can piggyback on what Justine has touched on.
Yeah, sure. So I found an old Mao quote from 1955 that was right at the time of China's first five-year plan, in which he said that it will take 15 five-year plans in order to surpass the United States, which I thought was quite a funny quote to use today, because of course this is the 15th five-year plan, and we're at a moment where the question is there whether China is just about to surpass the United States.
Right.
That also says something about five-year plan, which is it's not only about the next 5 years, but it takes place within a much longer-term vision, right? So at the time, even at the time of the first five-year plan, they were thinking 75 years ahead, 15 five-year plan ahead. That was the first step towards achieving, that ultimate vision 75 years down the road of surpassing the US.
Yep.
And that's the same thing with this plan today, where they have several long-term goals. So there is one goal for 2035, which is to reach what they call the moderately developed country status, which means reaching GDP per capita of $20,000, and then the longer-term plan by 2049, which will be the 100th anniversary of the founding of the PRC, which is to become a fully developed socialist country.
So it's gradual.
Yeah, exactly. Another thing to bear in mind for China's planning is there is that saying that in the West we have election cycles, and China has planning cycles. So it's very key to the Chinese system. Each plans, much like elections for us, in China, what's in the plan shows who is up or down in the Chinese system, whose ideas are winning, the way, the role that elections play with us. So it's not only about planning, it's about the system as a whole. It revolves around that.
Yeah, well, I'm glad both of you pointed the differences and the nuances, especially, that we have to point out to when we compare large economic bodies like China and the United States. There's too much nuance. We can't dive into all of them, but I guess I'm going to turn to Jostein again. So from your political economist point of view, what stands out to you as Arnold talked about continuity? So the continuity versus change compared with the previous plans. Is this particular plan still about high tech and productivity, or does it emphasize a more domestic demands? Does it signal a structural shift at all?
In terms of the priority sectors, the industries, the technological clusters that are prioritized in the five-year plan, I'd say there is a strong element of continuity in the sense that China will keep innovating in a range of industries. They'll keep trying to reach the technological frontier in a range of industries. That's not where I would put my emphasis on in terms of the change we're seeing. We could talk about saying clean energy. This stands very strong in this five-year plan, but it has also in some previous five-year plans. The semiconductor industry and AI also is a strong element of this five-year plan, but this, to some degree, is a continuation of economic planning policies for a few years. There are two things that stand out. One is China is gradually trying to achieve a greater degree of technological sovereignty and self-sufficiency, especially in this age of renewed economic nationalism and geopolitical tensions, like so many nations are doing. And the other interesting one is an increased focus on domestic demand and consumption. So China, in many ways, has been very clever in that they've designed their development strategy focusing on the supply side, focusing on production, and focusing on exports. And now that they have that base established, we are now seeing signs that maybe consumption and also demand domestically has to pick up. So that's I would say this kind of the strongest change we're seeing in this five-year plan, that the Chinese leadership wants to put a bit more emphasis on fighting these internal price wars and deflationary pressures.
Well, thank you. And I think your point echoes really well with Arnold's point about gradualism, right? Everything is gradual. We build a base, and then we'll have stuff after, and we build more and more decorations, et cetera, afterwards. So I'm going to turn to a keyword for this talk, which is involution, which is a term that now is part of Chinese policy vocabulary. So for our audience, could you guys both perhaps unpack what that means, and why is it significant that it's entering the official planning language? Maybe, Arnold, you can start,
Yeah, so involution basically means extreme competition, but not only for business, but more broadly in Chinese society. Actually, the first move that China made against involution was not in the economic sector, it was in the education sector.
Right.
Because you have this, this sort of trend of extreme competition between kids or between parents, really, trying to ensure. Yeah, exactly, Neidran, trying to ensure that their kids are better than the others at school. And so a couple of years back, China actually forbade the entire tutoring industry in order to make sure that learning was restricted to school. with mitigated success because there is
Right.
still a very large
Yeah.
underground tutoring industry. But that was the first move against involution.
In
Right now,
education.
we're seeing them trying to fight it in the economic sector as well.
Right, right.
Because there is a paradox where there are some industries in which Chinese firms lead globally, like solar panels or EVs and so on. But very few of those companies are actually very profitable because there is such extreme competition in China. And it's actually a very tricky problem to solve because in one way it's good. Competition is what made those companies very successful.
Yes.
But when it becomes too cutthroat, then no one is making money, and so it's too much. So you need to find the right balance, which is really not an easy thing
Right.
to do. Yeah.
And Jostein, do you have anything to add about involution, which actually is the direct translation of Neijun, to be honest? And but what does that mean from the political or industrial policy perspective? Arnold touched on over-competition, and then when it comes to industry, I think people relate it to overcapacity, right? So what does that signal for that particular?
I'll be brief because Arnaud went through it really well
Yeah.
right now. But yeah, evolution means so much more than just, say, overcapacity in production. But we can talk about that specifically. I have an issue with this term overcapacity because it's often weaponized by other countries to point out that China is supplying too many goods to the rest of the world. And I think this is really a matter of speed and scale. If you look at export of goods per capita, China is something like they're below 100th in the world. So if you take the population into account, they're actually not producing at overcapacity. They're simply a large country producing things very, very fast. However, domestically, there are some problems created by this intense price competition and production in some industries. And as Arnaud pointed out, there's, it's a double-edged blade because on the one hand, it's creating deflation. Some companies are really struggling domestically. But on the other hand, this intense competition and price competition is also what's created national champions in the solar industry. BYD, for example, the global automotive giant now, has been part of this domestic price competition in the EV industry for decades.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess going back to Arnold's point, it's really about finding the balance between we need national champions, but at the same time, China also needs to find a balance to how to moderately maintain those things, especially when it comes to your point about global competition and how China's partners will think about the price wars, etc. So we're at the Web Summit, of course. So I want to talk about globally for businesses and innovators at the summit, perhaps. What should we read into this? It can be involution, it can be the FYP itself. So are we looking at a more inward or outward focused China? Or are one setting the stage for new, let's say, outward technological assertiveness, as some Western media has been pointed out? Maybe you can touch on the myth busting behind it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's whether they're inward-looking or outward-looking. I think the important point is that they're innovating and defining the key industries of the future. I think that's really what matters.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I saw that a key focus on the new 5-year plan is what they call the low-altitude economy, which is a very big priority in China right now.
Yeah.
And it's that vision, basically, that we see in some science fiction movies of having like highways in the sky, like maybe in The Fifth Element, that movie, highways of drones and flying cars, transporting goods and persons. They're putting it in place in China right now, and they're investing billions of dollars in that. And whether they do it for themselves or then to export to the world, what really matters is they're doing it, and because they're doing it ahead of everyone else, one day we'll wake up.
Others will catch up and
exactly.
will benefit the world eventually.
Exactly. So it's very important to pay attention to what China is doing. We had that situation with EVs when it was mentioned in 5-year plans, decades ahead of China leading the field, but no one paid attention, and we woke up one day and wow, China is
the China shock.
Yeah,
right?
the China shock. China is the leader in that, and we didn't see it coming, but it was written it was planned in advance. So
Yeah.
that's why it's important to really pay attention to what they say they will do, because they will do it.
Yeah, and as you said, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's because eventually it's the consumers, it's the customers who are going to enjoy the final product. Now, Jostine, if you have any thoughts, we have 40 seconds left for you. Maybe you can quickly share your point on that.
You know, will China be inward or outward looking
Yeah.
in the next few years? You know, I think while it's important to recognize that China is going to strive for more technological sovereignty, economic security, increased domestic consumption, and in that sense, looking to strengthen the economy from a domestic point of view, it's going to be, the way I see it, an extremely outward-oriented economy. So right now, China is the most important trading partner for more than 120 countries in the world.
Yeah.
It is a very, very important player globally. It has invested tremendously in clean energy infrastructure and manufacturing projects across especially the global south, but also in Europe. So we'll definitely see China as a really important global and outward-looking force going ahead, establishing partnerships globally.
All right, thank you so much to you both. I mean, for the rest of the world, understanding China is beyond just one policy document. But again, it's about grasping how really a civilization thinks about the future, as both of my panelists have been pointed out. So thank you so much for a brilliant discussion, and thank you to the audience members for listening. Thank you, thank you.